Okay, we're good. We're good. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Salt Lake Takes. We are back here. I don't know what episode this is. I think we started in mid-July, but we're making some movement here. We're starting to get a groove in. Going into the NBA season, we're about under 2 months until that start date is here. Should be on the 25th, so we're just closing in under 2 months. Or 25th of October. Yeah, so we're just under 2 months to go until the start of the NBA season. Still a little bit to go, and we're right about like at the peak of NBA dead calendar. We're probably approaching that sooner rather than later, before training camp, before preseason. It's hard to really find a lot to talk about, I guess, because there's not much development really going on in the league, other than James Harden and Damian Lillard. And you see things about that every day. So that tends to just kind of float around. But other than that, there hasn't been much NBA news to cover, especially for the Jazz. But yeah, so the Jazz do have their full training camp roster on hand, though. That is one thing that has come out about the Jazz. They signed Romeo Langford, Tavion Kinsey, and Nick Ongenda. I think it's Ongenda is how you say his name. All three players fill out the Jazz roster at 21, going into the year 2023-24. So you would probably assume that this would be the final Jazz roster going into the year. I don't see much trades or really any signings being made to this, because the max a team can carry on going to training camp alone is 21. And is it? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So 21 is the max that can hold on right now, and they would need to cut that down to 18 by the start of the season. So I don't really see much change here on the Jazz front for next season. So what they have is what they got, really, is the way to really look at it. As far as like competing for spots or something like that, I'm not sure about the long-term prospect of Kinsey and Ongenda. Langford probably has a shot to make some noise in camp and in preseason if he really does well. I think Yurtseven and Samanic, don't quote me on this, but I think they are on non-guaranteed deals for next year, or partially guaranteed deals. So if Langford ends up playing really well, the Jazz could end up being a spot for him to land for the 15-man roster. And I think that wouldn't be a bad signing, of course. I mean, you can't really say much about him. He was a lottery pick back in 2019. Hasn't really found his footing back in the league yet. But he gets another shot here with Utah going into training camp, and hopefully it ends up well for him. We'll just see how it ends up shaking out. It'll be a competitive training camp. I think it'll probably come down to Yurtseven, Samanic, and Langford for that the last full roster spot. Maybe you could see Langford or one of those guys kick out. I probably Hauser on the 2-man lineup. I'm not sure how it'll exactly shake out yet, but that is for September, October talk. Probably we can probably discuss it later on. What we're here to talk about today is going. It's mixed bag, really. You have a lot here that you can really expect with the Jazz. It's kind of a wait and see approach that the Jazz have gone under, and patience is really the key. The Jazz are focusing in on it. Sometimes a lot of teams try and make that all-in push to try and compete for a championship, and more often than not, it doesn't work out. I mean, you can quote probably a dozen deals within the past decade to really exemplify that. I mean, Minnesota did the deal with the Jazz themselves. I mean, that's one to count right there. Cleveland, I mean, with Donovan Mitchell, that's another deal that hasn't really panned out yet. I mean, it's still early in the process. It's 1 year. I'm trying to think of even just later or earlier on examples that aren't really talked about, because of course there's like the Nets trade, or the 2 Nets trades that have gone down to really shake up their roster for the long term and for the worse too. So making that big jump and big push to make a trade for the roster, like the Jazz could do with the assets they have on hand, might not be the best decision to go about. So having that patience like Danny Ainge has had and the rest of the Jazz front office is really probably the best strategy to go. It probably does take a little bit longer than expected for Jazz fans, but fear not, it's going to be okay. And because Danny Ainge was just ranked the best. I think it was the best executive in the league. So, the Jazz are in good hands. We got Car Wash channel popping in to say, what's up? What's up, Car Wash? But yeah, Utah has to have they have to have a pretty much perfect front office in order to execute an NBA Finals winning team. Like, to put one together in a small market like Utah or like Sacramento or Oklahoma City or like Charlotte. I'm trying to think of other teams that really fit that mold, but if you are a small market in the NBA, you have to build a team pretty much perfectly to have a real shot at winning the finals. So, and in the Jazz's case, instead of going in all in and pushing your chips in on, like, let's say a Damian Lillard trade like they could do, right now. They're deciding to take the long term approach, wait for the right opportunities, draft, and make the right the wise decisions. And that's what Danny Ainge is about, making wise decisions and making long term deals. And it's worked out really well so far. Because the last thing you want to do is swing and miss on a blockbuster deal with the assets the Jazz have. Because think about, let's say the Jazz made a deal for Damian Lillard and they give up like 3, 4 first round picks and it doesn't work out. You're throwing those valuable assets away, which they could turn into like, top 5 picks down the line. So if you were to throw in your assets like that, it wouldn't be. I mean, maybe it turns out well if you're lucky, but I mean, more often than not, 9 times out of 10, those blockbuster trades don't really result in championships, more than you'd like to see. But they haven't done that, luckily, and we're dealing with what we got right here. And so it's probably good to just kind of walk in the season with what they have, and just kind of roll with it and see what goes on throughout the year. Got Car Wash popping in saying, for my answer for the Jazz to have a successful season is to win every game and not lose a game. Trade Kelly Olynyk and play defense. Win every game. That would be pretty successful to start off, and then trade Kelly Olynyk and play defense. I'll get to trading Olynyk down the line because I kind of agree with that statement. But yeah, I can get into that a little bit later and play defense. That'll be really helpful for the Jazz to do. If they're going to win every game, they probably need to play a little bit of defense. So good observation there from the Car Wash. But let me see if I can get my banners. Okay. We got these 3 things here. Hopefully makes it easier to track for people watching it or coming in. Just to make it simple, I have 3 things that the Jazz can do to have a successful season next year. So we go through one by one through those and just kind of, recap those. For the first one I have is the inevitable Walker Kessler leap. Need Walker Kessler to come in and have a big showing in year 2 because he's going to be a key piece in the way this Jazz team ends up operating for the future. How he develops and how he really takes off, or what his ceiling ends up being, is pretty much how far. The sky's the limit, really. He has all the physical tools that you'd want to see in a center. He's got the size and the defensive ability already. He just needs to put it together on offense, really, and get more opportunity, which he will get this year. He started only 40 games last year, so not even half the season. Kessler did not start for more than 41 games, and he only played about 23 minutes a night. For your starting center, that is practically nothing. You see guys like Jaren Jackson, for example, he's getting less minutes a night. I think under 30 is about what he averages. But, for guys like Embiid and Jokic, of course, Kessler's far off from that. For the big guys in the league, they're getting 40 minutes a night. And Walker Kessler was a rookie last year, so it probably gradually putting him in the rotation. But he's going to have a much bigger role this year. Going to have a way bigger opportunity and way larger role to work with because last year he was still getting integrated in the system, still getting, into the NBA groove. Now he has a year under his belt and has some Team USA experience ready to go too. So there's a lot going for Kessler to like this year because, he averaged, I think it was 9, 8 and 2.5 blocks in just the 23 minutes played. So imagine if he has that in a full sample size. As like the second or third best player on this team. It's going to be scary, I think. If everything goes well for him, but I think it really just comes down to developing that better offensive skill set. It would be a dream for him to come in and be like a just like a Jokic type of offensive guy, but that's not his skill set. Of course, he's a defender at heart. But the key to becoming a really good defensive big man in the league, that's also one of like the elite just overall big man, and just becoming like a defensive big man, there's a big gap there. But you have to be at least a formidable threat as on offense to be able to garner that type of prestige, I guess. Because look at guys like Clint Capella, or I'm trying to think of other defensive big men out there. Just guys that are very limited in what they can do and provide on the other end of the floor, which makes it much smaller of a workload to defend for the other team or any opposing team. Because if Kessler can only shoot inside the paint or really a little bit outside of that, it's not going to be that hard to defend him. You focus on the other 4 guys on the team, and that makes it much harder. So for Kessler to actually be a long-term piece on this team, perfect example, I was just thinking one, Rudy Gobert. For him to not become a Rudy Gobert, he needs to develop a little bit more offensive skills. And that's very doable. I'm not going to put him in a category as just a defensive center right now. He is right now. But later down the line, you've seen players like Brook Lopez, and that's a casual example, but who are some other guys that develop a shot? Again, there's just immense opportunity to see growth in players nowadays, especially big men, to develop that shot. It just takes a while once you get in the league to actually develop that skill set. And I think Kessler can do it. I think Kessler really has potential to do it. And if he can develop that shot to at least like league average and respectable, even all right. So like a guy like Anthony Davis, last year he's not this prominent like 40% shooter. Anthony Davis only shoots about 26% from 3-point line. So, and he's viewed as like one of these top 20 players in the league. So that shows that you don't have to be a super elite offensive big man to be considered one of the best in the league, because Kessler doesn't need to come in and average 30 a game for his impact to be shown. That's on the other end of the floor. It just comes down to, if you need him to put a ball in the basket, he can do that. And if he's able to get that done, if he can just shoot maybe a corner three every now and then in a pinch, or get established mid range, that would be super helpful, especially for his development on this team. Because spacing is key on this team, versatility is key on this team, and Kessler's going to need that for this next year. And I think that's something to keep an eye on. See how his offensive game develops, but more importantly, see how he does with the advanced opportunity, more minutes a game, being probably in closing lineups. He's going to have a much stronger role than he did at the beginning of last year. Going into next year will be much different landscape for him, and super exciting for Jazz fans. But yeah, I think that's pretty much what there is for Kessler. Going on to our second one, for the Jazz to prioritize young talent. This is crucial. I think this is probably the biggest one for them next year. Because at the end of the day, this team has however many draft picks to try and build for the future. So you need to hit on those draft picks. It is very crucial. If you're not going to trade your draft picks, you're taking your guys. You need to hit on these players. And they have 3 this year. Not many. No other team can say that. I'm pretty sure no other team in the league has 3 first-round picks to work with this year. So they need to be able to hit on just one. Just one. That's all you need. You have Taylor Hendricks, you have Keontae George, and you have Bryce Sensabaugh. I think all 3 of those players have the chance to come in and potentially be, I don't want to put too many expectations on them, but could they be an all-star level player one day? Absolutely. I think any 3 of those players have all-star potential. We got Planet of the Jazz. Good night. What's going on? Constant viewers of the stream, really. Appreciate y'all showing some love. But I think, for this team to have some true success this next season, I think you need to prioritize that young talent, because there's no point of having these draft picks and playing this young talent if you're not going to have them develop into like these key pieces on a team. And I'm not talking like these, they can't just be like, like average starters. Like you can't just be like, just not bust. Like one of these 3 players probably needs to be an all-star level player. And maybe that's a little bit too high of an ask, but I don't think so. I mean, especially with teams in the league today, star power is getting better and better. And for you to have 3 first-round picks and then end up being just average, that's not probably what you're looking for in these drafts. You need to hit on some. And that's probably very attainable for a team like the Jazz, because Hendricks and George were both top 10 prospects for them. So they clearly see something in both of them that have the potential to grow into a larger role on this team. But you have to get them involved early. You absolutely involve all of the youth, not even just first-round picks, but guys like Kessler, like I said earlier, Ochai Agbaji. All of these young guys need to have a big role on this team. That's very important. We got Planet of Jazz popping in here. My issue is that Ainge and Zanuck want to get back pick 2024 for Favors trade. So that's a big here. I'll keep it up real quick. It's a big piece of what the Jazz can do. I had that written down. I was about to go over that right now. There's no first round pick that they have to work with next year. So if they want to prioritize that young talent, and it's okay if you're not successful either way, because if you are not a top 10, or if you are not a top 20 team and not making the plan, you manage to get a top 10 pick and you get your first round pick back. And that's not the worst scenario if you're the Jazz, because you're prioritizing young talent. But if the Jazz are able to come in and make the play-in and show that they can win by prioritizing these young players and they pop out, that's okay. I think you can afford to lose that first round pick, because it'll convert one way or another down the line. If it ends up being this year, that's okay, as long as this team is showing strides in the right direction. And that comes within showing your young guys minutes on the floor. I don't know how big of a role guys like Bryce Sensabaugh will have on day one, because he was the 3rd first round pick on a loaded team, or a deep team. I don't want to say loaded, a deep team. So that makes it a little bit difficult to project what his first, few minutes in the game, first few games will look like. But I think once you get into it, once you get in the season, you'll see Bryce Sensabaugh take off for a little bit more. Uh, I'm not saying for this team to go out and tank. That's not what I'm saying. I think as long as you are just making sure that these guys are getting the opportunity, probably at least 20 minutes a night down the stretch, at least by far, absolutely down after the All-Star break, all three of these rookies should be getting over 20 minutes a game by far, and you should be prioritizing this young talent, get them minutes on the floor, get them experience. That would be massive, and the sooner you're able to do that, the sooner this team is able to get to championship level considerations. Yeah, but I think that is going to be your second. Actually, I put that number two, but that's probably the best, most important aspect of this Jazz team is prioritizing on that young talent to make sure this team's set up well for the future. Because the sooner you're able to do that, and the sooner you're able to see that Taylor Hendricks or Keontae George might be the man, you get a better sense of direction on this team. The Jazz don't really have that type of direction right now. So once you're able to find that with the guys you're going to build with long term on this team are going to have a super big role, the sooner this team's going to get on the right track to going to title contention. And so with my third proposal of how the Jazz can go through the season, sell high on assets. They need to sell high on all of their assets. And I think they only have two that they can really deal with this coming trade deadline. I'm talking like trade deadline because the Jazz did the same thing last offseason when they traded away Conley and Vanderbilt to try and get those first round picks. They should do the exact same thing this offseason. They have, or not offseason, trade deadline. Come trade deadline, I think Kelly Olynyk and Taylor Horton-Tucker are two guys that can be looked at to be moved. Reason being, both on expiring deals, just like the Jazz were doing last offseason. They're getting rid of expiring deals, guys that don't have a long-term prospect on this or like a vision on this team. You got to get rid of them while you can, especially with a guy like Kelly Olynyk. He is a big man that can shoot the rock, and especially he's a veteran guy. He can contribute on a nightly basis to whatever team it may be, showing right now with Canada, and it showed last year with the Jazz where he started every single game that he played. So I think it's very important that if you're going to deal him, you deal him now because he's going to be an unrestricted free agent. I don't know if he's a lock to return to Utah or if he's really super considered to come back to Utah because he is that young or that older player and looking for that title contending team probably at this point in his career. So dealing him now, probably getting him a better chance to compete, getting better assets to work with, probably better than keeping him on the roster next offseason and hoping to bring him back for what? Like, I know Kelly's good, and I actually really like Olynyk, but I think if you're looking with an unbiased view, keeping a 33-year-old center on the roster for a bigger price might not be the greatest decision for a team that will probably be paying up their young players soon. Or just bringing in talent. You want to keep that salary space and that roster space. So I don't know if he's really allowed to come back. It's going to depend on trades for JH and DL. Ainge can have change after teams. Oh, sorry, I'm reading this. Okay, I'm reading this super slow. Let's restart here. It's going to depend on trades, JH and DL. Ainge can have change after teams will need to trade. Yeah, it's yeah. It's going to be an interesting scenario for sure. But I think Ainge is a guy that really maximizes what he can do with his assets. He works really well with the assets he has on hand. I mean, you've seen it time and time again. Oh, okay. This really clears things up. JH and DL. I was like, what am I reading here? Who am I talking about? Okay, Harden and Lillard. It is going. Okay, sorry. Thank you for clearing that up. Yeah, it's all right. Let's read this again. It's going to depend on trades. James Harden, Damian Lillard. Ainge can have change up teams. Well, yes, that makes a lot of sense. So the market's going to really need to play out for the Jazz to really have a super big lookout. Or they're going to have to. The market's going to have to even out for the Jazz to really evaluate their roster fully. I think once those two are really set in stone, it'll be a lot easier to pinpoint where this Jazz team can go with trading for star players. And I don't think it's going to be either of those two. They don't really fit the timeline, nor like the needs that this team would really want. They don't really want an older guy that wants to command a super big offensive workload in a smaller market. Neither team really wants this. Neither the player or the team. Neither side wants this. So I don't think either of those two are really a consideration for the Jazz. But I think down the line, you can see what those guys go for. You see what the market price is, and then you take a look at what your assets are. You're like, okay, what can we do with this? And then you go after the next guy. I think it's probably the process they're going through, see what the star players are going for, after their trade. So once these guys end up going for their packages, the Jazz can kind of replicate that going forward. Uh, but yeah, where was I at? Okay, selling high on assets. Yes. So already went down on Kelly Olynyk. Taylor and Tucker is going to be a guy. He's on a player option this year. Likely to leave in free agency. I would feel. I think with the way his tenure's trending right now, he's signed for 10 mil this year, and with the amount of guards this roster has right now, I don't know if it's going to be a super big priority for Utah to come in and be like, okay, let's re-sign Taylor and Tucker. We have to re-sign Taylor and Tucker. I don't think that's really the thought process they have, unless he has a really good year. Of course, that's very possible if he's going to come in and average and be the starting point guard. I think by all means bring him back. But if all signs point to what they have been right now, I don't see a way that he comes back. Actually, that's probably overselling it a bit. I think it's a little unlikely for Taylor and Tucker to come back after next year. But of course, you give him the opportunity to start the next season, and or not maybe not. You can give him the opportunity to start if he plays well. He's good enough to do that. And you give him some time throughout the year. Surely, I think a team at the deadline would want to take a shot on him if the Jazz were offering up, and then the Jazz see what they get, maybe a second or some assets. But really, you have assets on this roster that are long term and short term assets. And it's very clear, I think, you know which ones are which. Like you have Markkanen and Kessler, and let's say Keontae George and Taylor Hendricks. All four of those guys, and probably more, are going to look to be on this team for years to come. However, for guys like Kelly Olynyk and Taylor Horton-Tucker, maybe even Jordan Clarkson down the line, are guys that you can't put 100% confidence on being with this team long term. So if that is the case, if you have probably your last opportunity to deal them maybe at the trade deadline in February, that would be the time to move them. And that sets up the Jazz pretty well long term, rather than kind of hoping on one of them coming back or maybe both of them coming back. It allows them to kind of maximize what they have to work with. And Danny Ainge has done that his entire career. So I wouldn't put it past them to deal one of, if not both, of Kelly Olynyk and Taylor Horton-Tucker. And if they did that, I wouldn't think it would be a horrible decision either. But yeah, I can go down the bottom line here. The forward progress in the Western standings would be a win in itself. I think in a Western Conference that is so loaded, and the Jazz managed to get the 12th seed last year, which is pretty respectable in itself. The Jazz were able to move up one spot or two, even. That would be great, I think. You have such a competitive tight race within like 3 to 12 or even like 2 at this point. Like you have Denver and then every other team below it, and then a few teams that might bottom out. So I think if the Jazz were able to raise up where they were from last year at all, that is a win in itself. Because I think some progress is better than none. So maybe the Jazz end up kind of falling down a little bit in the standings if things end up really bad. But even if that happens, if you bottom out on this roster, you get a top 5 pick probably. Hopefully, maybe. I'm not sure how the lottery would shake out or how the East would stand out. But you could bottom out, get a really good draft pick. You could also miss the playoffs barely, but you can still show that this roster. You can still show this roster is competitive with a jump in the standings. But even if you aren't doing that, the Jazz are in a perfect position to come in and deal for a star if they need to. They have all the assets to come in and be like, okay, our roster is not good enough to be a playoff team yet. Our team was fully healthy and we couldn't do it. Let's go in and deal for another guy to add to this squad. So the Jazz will be fully healthy, fully reloaded with young talent, can come in and be pretty solid. But maybe not on the level of a championship team or not a championship team, a playoff team. Maybe they're not a playoff team and they see that and they're like, all right, now this is the time to make a move. Zach Lowe said the Jazz have a similar record than last year. It would be as well. Do you agree? I could probably, I think so. I think it would probably be a similar record. Maybe a little bit higher in terms of the win column, just because the team will be fully healthy down the stretch and probably trying to win games, you would hope. So considering the Jazz were just trying their best to lose down the stretch in the second half of the season, you would expect for this team to get better with the additions they made and fully healthy. I would see a little bit better, but probably I don't see any significant drop off or any crazy, uptick in the standings. But I could see probably something like that. But selling high on Markkanen would be a similar package to Gobert deal. Okay, this is an interesting proposal. Selling high on Markkanen. See, this is okay. So here's where this gets interesting. Depends on how your long-term contract goes. So I think after this offseason, I think Markkinen is set to renegotiate his deal or long-term extension with the Jazz. At this point, the Jazz have shown every intention to keep him, and that's probably the best decision to do, I think. But if he's going to command a crazy high price, the contract talks don't go your way. This would be the time to do it, especially because you have all the time to really build upon this young core. So if there was a time to sell high on your best player, it would be now while you're still building. So I so, okay. So to answer the question, would I do a marketing deal similar to the Gobert deal? Absolutely. If a deal came across my table and dealing for 5 first round picks for marketing, I would absolutely do that. As far as like a reason, maybe like a more reasonable deal, like a three first round pick deal. I don't know if I do that just yet because the Jazz already have so many first round picks. At some point, you're going to need to have good players on the roster, and I mean, Markin was an All Star last year, and he seems to be content staying in Utah. And I'd be kind of hard pressed to give that up in any trade package unless it's really prominent for a star player in your package and go marketing in there. That would be probably the only scenario that I consider dealing him at this point. But if those contract talks kind of go south, I could see that. But at this point, I would probably consider him a long term piece. I would consider him one of those long term assets you keep on him. I have a friend that thinks Danny want to improve Collins himself, then trade him. That would be okay. So I think this is also a possibility as well. John Collins is on a 3-year deal with a lot of cap. I think it's a $75 million deal over the next 3 years. Not cheap, especially for a team that could be building for a championship roster. That's a big anchor to have on your cap space or on your cap roll. So if Collins were to come in and be, an improved version of himself, have a really good season with this Jazz team, I don't think it'd be a shock at all to see the Jazz decide to be like, okay, we sold high on him, and then see what we can get out of him, or we bought low on him, we sell him high, and you just continue to build upon your assets. That's what Danny Ainge continues to do. He sold at the tip top. I saw Chad talk about the other night. He sold the very tip top of the market when it came to Gobert and it came to Mitchell, and now the market settled back down. And you want to build upon what you have right now. And then once you evaluate what you have, you deal your guys, and then you set up for the future again. I mean, you're probably going to build a more competent roster than you have right now, but that's got to be the framework, really. But yeah. But for the Jazz, as far as like goals for next year, I think if you're able to hit over 500, that is a spectacular season, I think in this conference, if this team is able to get over 41 wins, that is a super big win. That would be, I think they got 35 wins last year. So that'd be about a 6-win improvement. That would be a super, I think it'd be a super good season for the Jazz because that would probably put them in around the play-in competition. I think that'd probably put them in the play-in if they're above 500, maybe a little bit higher than that, depending on how close the conference is. But yeah, I think if the Jazz were to come in and get an over 500 record, maybe a play-in appearance, maybe even a little bit more than that, anything more. If the Jazz were to come in and get a top 6 seed, that would be stellar. So that's like best case scenario. But a play-in appearance should probably be a reasonable expectation. If they bottom out, it's not the end of the world because they have so many assets and they're pretty flexible with what they have right now. Honestly, I could see market and trade happening post extension with picks to be further in the future. Yeah, post extension, I could see that if Danny Ainge is like, all right, let's really. It is looking way distant in the future. But it's like, okay, if we're not really winning with marketing as like a 2 or 3 best player on this team, I could see him getting shipped off. That's not unimaginable at all. And depending on how we do in the next couple of years, very true. Because like if marketing is able to lead this team to a top 8 seed, and you can add another player around him probably and be as like marketing can probably be the second best player on a championship team. I would say. I think at some point, he will probably be the second best player on a championship team or around that quality. So I think when you're looking at trades for him, you got to look for something that is comparable to that value. And with the way the Jazz are right now, I'd probably just stick with what I have. You could have unlimited first round picks, of course, and all those first round picks would look great on your stockpile. But the Jazz are already looking way ahead of schedule as they are right now to try and sell off on an all-star in marketing and get a few picks back that way. It seems like we're going to be in a constant like snowball effect. Like we're going to keep getting first round picks and keep getting good players, but then keep shipping them off. I think their intention is to hold on the market while they can, hold on their good players, keep drafting good guys to their future, and that should be the strategy. I think a deal with marketing wouldn't be bad because he is going to be, I think, 27. So his timeline is probably a little bit accelerated than this roster actually is. But again, I think he's just too talented to really sell off on right now. But let's say the Jazz. Okay, worst case scenario, the Jazz end up as like a bottom 5 seed. Do we trade Markin at that point? Maybe. I mean, maybe that's the discussion. You just get more first round picks and like really bottom out then and just really start to tank. At that point, though, it's like, well, what's the reason for that? Like, why would you do that? I don't know. I like Markin as a piece of this team. I think he can be a big attribute to how this team actually fares moving forward. We are Jazz Nation from San Diego, California. That is hard. I like that. Go Nura Osman. I see you supporting every single post we got, man. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Top fan on the channel. But yeah, I think that's probably gonna about do it tonight. Pretty average type of stream that we got right now. We're gonna enter September, which is like the last month before the season actually kicks off and really gets going. But until then, we're working with what we got. Exciting season ahead for the Jazz. We are Jazz Nation from San Diego, California, and everywhere. But yeah, that's gonna about do it for me. We'll be back same time next week with new topics, new things to talk about. Hopefully, FIBA gonna keep going on, keep pressing on. We have Simone and Walker Kessler, and who's the third guy? Olynyk. Yeah, Olynyk's there too. So all three of them are still competing. I know Markkanen and Clarkson are out of contention, but we got 3 Jasmine still competing for a gold medal. Hopefully, one of them comes out on top. But until then, we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, that's all I have for now. I appreciate y'all for tuning in. Be sure to tune in next week, same time. We'll be back right then. But yeah, appreciate everyone. See ya.